This lecture is being brought to you in part by the generous gifts of these sponsors.
Hurricanes, resilience, smartwatches, mobility, aging, and surgeries. Those are the topics I'm going to be talking about today. Now you might say, how are they all going to weave together? I'm not sure, but we're going to find out. Hello, my name is Todd Manini. I'm from the University of Florida, Department of Health Outcomes and Biomedical Informatics, as well as our Claude D. Pepper Center. And thanks for having me tonight. So, we have a few things for our agenda. I do want to talk about Claude D. Pepper, and some of you may have heard of him before. Our core, some things we're doing in Gerotechnology with regard to mobility resilience, wearable technology, and as well as looking at how it can be used to help us recover. So I'm going to first start out saying where I'm from. Well, University of Florida. Actually, my office is in this new building called Malachowski Hall for Data Science and Information Technology. I'm very fortunate to be on that very top, that 7th floor here, which we have great windows and a really beautiful balcony over here. And this is a brand new building, opened only about a year ago. And it's actually the biggest building on the University of Florida campus. I also, where I do a lot of my research, is at the Institute on Aging, and also the Clinical and Translational Research Building. And the Claude D. Pepper Center is actually kind of mixed in between these two places. And these centers each have a theme, and ours is really looking at the pursuit of preserving and restoring mobility and independence in late life. Who is Claude D. Pepper? By a raise of hands, who knows who Claude D. Pepper is? Wonderful. I asked that same question to younger audiences, and they don't. So, Florida U.S. Senator from 1936 to 1951, and then House Representative from 1962 to 1989. Was the chairman of the House Select Committee for Aging, was a huge proponent of aging, and actually was on the cover of Time magazine in 1983 as the spokesman for the elderly. Fought for Age Discrimination Act, and I learned that you could actually be fired from your job if you were over the age of 60 for no reason back before 1970 or 1967 when it first came out. So he was the sponsor of that bill. Strengthened Social Security, built Medicare stronger, as well as was the sponsor for the Medicare Catastrophe Protection Act, which allowed outpatient drugs and capped co-payments. So a huge advocate. And the centers that are under his name actually do the same type of thing. Now, one report by Claude Pepper was his reports on quackery, a $10 billion scandal. And I got a real good kick out of this because this came out in 1984, and it really talked about all the frauds that are out there that are working against older adults. And in this, there's probably about 30 pages of all the frauds that had came up through this inquiry. I like this one up top here. Miraculous water from Lourdes heals thousands. Arthritis, paralysis, even cancer washed away by holy water blessed by the Virgin Mary. So the whole point of this was to shut these frauds down. And he was the person that did this. So the National Institute on Aging decided to name these centers after him, rightfully so. And the goal here is that these are centers of excellence for research and education. to increase scientific knowledge, to maintain and restore independence. That's really the goal. There's 15 of them in the country, and obviously we're the one down here in Florida. Now, our mission, each center has a little bit of a different mission. Our goal is to eliminate physical disability by understanding mobility loss, first of all, because we know it's very multifactorial. There's not a single cause to this. Understand the risk and the complexities with that risk, develop therapies, and also educate. I'll tell you a little bit how we educate as well. So the way these centers are kind of set up is money flows from the government down to us, and what we do is we foster research at our local environment. University of Florida is a very big entity. So our goal is really to keep aging research flourishing at the university. So one way we do that is through education and providing services, and these are kind of our service cores, what they're called. One is metabolism translation of science core, my core digital health, systems and omics, systems physiology, clinical research, and biostats. But really what we do, for the most part, is infuse and give people some money to do research, pilot studies, to get them like little startups. So last year, we gave out around $600,000 in pilot awards. Now these are awards to mostly junior scientists just starting out. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get them to start doing aging research. And it's very multidisciplinary. We fund people from applied physiology and kinesiology, college of medicine stuff, all the way to construction and urban design, all doing work with regard to aging. Now, there is a concept here that you may not know of, and it's called the 5 M's of geriatrics. And there's 5 of them because we have 5 fingers, and it's easier to remember. And mobility is one of them. The other ones are medications, mind, what matters most, and multi-complexity. Now, this actually came out in the healthcare setting to really kind of remind doctors that it's not all about the disease. You know, our system is very set up like an organ-based disease system. It's more than that when you start aging. You can manage disease conditions, but you also have to worry about what matters most to that patient. And these 5 M's came out in around 2017 or so, and mobility is one of them. And our real goal is to understand the loss of mobility because it's connected to so many different things and the innate quality of life. So with regard to that, resilience is a concept that we often want to understand because it's a dynamic process of maintaining that positive adaptation. So when you get knocked down, can you cope with it and bounce back? But you got to have that adversity. So that healthcare with the 5 M's is about getting knocked down and coming back. We know there's another definition that's often used is an individual difference or characteristic or an ability to successfully cope with change or misfortune. A key point to resiliency is that it must be paired with an adversity. Now you might hear that people are resilient or have a sense of resiliency. That's an individual characteristic or trait. Like that's a person who's resilient. What I'm talking about more is how people cope with an adversity and bounce back. So we think of resiliency sometimes, especially because of this talk, we're thinking about it within the individual. But the folks in construction and urban design think of resiliency as something different. And the way they think about it is they think about the actual town or the city or the neighborhood, how resilient that is. So about 10 years ago, this organization called the Multidisciplinary Center for Earthquake Engineering Research developed a think tank to actually try to quantify resiliency of an environment. And, they came up with this definition of resiliency: the ability of social units to mitigate hazards, contain effects of disasters when they occur, and carry out recovery activities in ways that minimize social disruption and mitigate the effects of future disasters. So again, a lot of adversity there, right? Disasters, and thinking about the social disruption that happens with things like hurricanes. So when you bring it back to resiliency in a human or an individual, it's not just what's inside of you, it's also the environment that you're in and how that's going to impact whether you bounce back. So if you want to measure your resilience, by the way, there's actually a website for that. You can go to resilienceScale.com and go through a few questions, and I did mine. And it says, your answers to this brief resilience assessment indicate that your overall resilience is flourishing, which is kind of interesting. I don't know what other categories there are. I'm a little above average, but the questions were basically like, if you were posed with this, what would you do? Now, when I was bringing together the human individual as well as the environment, I started working with a colleague from College of Design, Construction, Engineering, Yan Wang, because she was interested in life-space mobility. So now that's an area that I know about. She knows about urban resilience, and let's couple this into mobility resilience. Well, life-space mobility is a concept about how much activity around outside of your home you get to. So for example, you came today. Your life space mobility is already being able to get out of your home, get in a car, go to a different town or a city or a neighborhood. Next step would be out of the state, next state out of the country. So it's like levels. Now, as we get older and things happen, the levels go down. We start to become homebound. This is a well-known trait. This happens. And most of the time, this is quantified by just asking people, how often do you get outside? How often do you get out of your town? Well, what's really interesting is Jan, my colleague, had a different way of measuring this and actually quantify it. And it was really cool. And this is what collaboration does, right? I didn't know what she did. She didn't know what I did. But we came together and talked for several months, and we came up with some cool ideas. So I wanted to tell you something that's going to probably freak you out a little bit, but it's okay. So I have this person walking around with a cell phone. Everyone's probably got one in this room. Well, your cell phone companies can sell your data. However, there's stipulations to that. They cannot sell your specific location and no demographic information at all. What they do is summarize this into whether that phone went inside a building and went outside of a building. how long it stayed in the building, how long did it take you to come out, and where did you go next? That's called point of interest data, right? The points of interest are businesses. You get no home data here just so you get no home. We don't know anything about the home. We only know businesses. So like gas stations, grocery stores, hospitals, clinics, pharmacies, and it's all categorized. Now this is data that you actually purchase. Right? There's a company that actually kind of harvests all this. But you can use it in unique ways. Because if you kind of think about it, going outside of your home and going in these businesses and spending time there, that's kind of a life space mobility. That's getting out of your home and doing this. Now, if you see a drop in how many visits people do, then there's something going on with that environment. Or the behavior of the individuals not going there. So we can quantify that by looking at how many visits that building actually had. And then we can break it down also to the neighborhood level. Now these, in our world, are called census tracts. They're basically like units within like a region. So, now I know there's going to be some graphs here. I will take you through them. So we're going on this concept of mobility resilience using point of interest data. Now, let's say you have a building, let's say this building. It might get 50 visits a day. Well, if there's a hurricane, people stay home. So it might go down to 2, right? Now, eventually, you're going to see visits start to come up if things recover. Or what happens if the building is damaged? Well, then you won't see people come in at all. Or what happens if that community is a different demographics? Or maybe they have social vulnerabilities and they tend not to come back into the community. Well, this can be measured with the point of interest data. So if you have an adversity, which is really key for resiliency, right? We can measure that point of interest data and see how it drops and changes and then recovers. And by doing that, we have a way to quantify it at the macro level. And we can quantify high resilience, which means you get knocked down and you bounce back pretty quick and you get back to where you were before that adversity happened. But then you have instances which are knocked down further than this community, let's say, but then it stays down. Either that means that there's like permanent damage happening in that environment, or that people are just not coming back into the environment for some reason. Hurricane Ian, 2022. It was one of the most devastating hurricanes, and it was the third costliest disaster on record worldwide. Also one of the deadliest in the state of Florida since the 1935 Labor Day hurricane. And what we did was we connected the time of that hurricane with that point of interest data. And then we knew the age of the communities. Well, there's a range in age of communities. You have young communities, you have older communities. And we just wanted to ask a very simple question. Do the older communities, do they bounce back like the younger communities? And now I'm not talking about you as an individual. I'm talking about the group of individuals. So what this is you're going to see a couple of these maps. This is the path of the hurricane going through here. So we're only looking at the path of the hurricane. And then we have the red, the darker red here are the older communities. So those are like 50s and above. Then the younger communities are between 40 and 50, and then 30 and 40. And then you have some communities less than 35, less than 36 years of age. So we're looking at about 1,800 Florida neighborhoods with a population of about 8 million, with 225,000 social infrastructure POIs and 75 million visitation records. So this is pretty big data. Thank goodness for Yan Wang, because I couldn't do this. So I'm going to show you a few graphs here. And I will step you through. This is called the ratio of impact. What this basically is telling you at the start, there's a drop and there's a recover. Now, some people recover all the way back, Some people recover all the way back, which means you had no impact at all. But some people, or some communities, didn't come back. There's a gap, meaning people didn't come back and start visiting businesses again. And when we looked at it, those communities that were older, 53 and over, that gap was bigger. They were less likely to come back into that neighborhood after. When it was over, when it was completely over. So there's an indication that it's not, life-space mobility is not just about like you yourself, but it's also the fact that your environment, you're not going back into it because of the hurricane. Now, another thing was the duration. So how long was it? So duration is just measured by the drop, how far it went down, and then how long it took to get back to a stable level. And in that case, it took about a day to a day and a half longer for these older communities to get back to the normal way of doing things. And then finally, there's this cool concept called the resilience triangle. And basically, it takes all of these variables into account. It's the area under this completely. Now, if the duration's longer, then you're probably going to have a larger area under the curve. And that's exactly what we find. Older communities stay in that zone of not recovering longer. So I'm going to transition here. That was a talk at the grand macro level of mobility resilience. Now I'm going to go back to the individual level. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what we think of when we start to do some of our bigger data analysis, especially with electronic health records. There's been a big boom of researchers using these big databases that contain mostly de-identified electronic health records, and they do mining on it. Well, when you actually look, when I was thinking about this, how much time do you actually spend in the hospital or even in clinics, even in like regular outpatient visits? It's really not that long, right? So if you think about your entire lifetime, you might go 200-300 times, around 400, 500 hours. And you might have some hospitalizations along the way. But when you look at over your entire lifespan, it's a tiny percentage that you actually spend in the medical system. And my point here is that most of our health happens outside of that. But we know a lot less about that because it's difficult to measure. It's really difficult to measure. So when we do our clinical research, we have to bring people in and we do assessments and then they go back out. But those assessments sometimes are not real life. So what we want to do I guess it's been 10 years now, 10 years ago, we wanted to build a tool that we can capture better information that's outside of the medical system, outside of a laboratory environment, that's feasible. And about that time, the Samsung Gear watch, smartwatch, came out. And then soon after, the Apple Watch came out. By a raise of hands, how many people are wearing an Apple Watch or smartwatch right now? Good, you guys are a very technology savvy crowd. Very good. So what we wanted to do was take this public tool that you purchased for fun and for use in your personal life and turn it into a research tool. Well, we can do that because there's apps you can make and create for it. And if you know how to program that app, you can capture a lot of really good data. Right? It's got an accelerometer. It's got location. It's got heart rate. It seems like every 6 months there's another sensor that's built into it. Now they got temperature. There's a graphical interface, so it can actually, you can interact with it. All in one small little package. And having all these kind of data streams coming together at one time is really amazing. For a researcher like me, it's kind of like the Holy Grail. Now, when I'm talking about doing these smartwatch studies, we're not talking about your personal smartwatch. We give watches to people. We give people Apple Watches with our software on it. And then they take them. Oftentimes, we just give it to them at the end of the study because our studies tend to be longer. So we came up with a tool we call Real-Time Online Assessment Mobility Monitor, or the ROAM app. It's more of a platform. It's not just the app. There's a lot of other things that have to connect to it to make it work. And we developed as part of this core in our older Americans Independence Center, the Claude D. Pepper Center. And where we really want to know more about is how people bounce back, right? Going back to that resilience concept after having a health event. And I'm not talking about the ones that are catastrophic, that might make you go to the hospital, even the small ones. So when we do our research studies, we'll do a longitudinal study. And we'll ask you back in the lab, maybe once every 6 months, if we're lucky, maybe once a year, sometimes once every 2 years. We get snapshots of what's happening. And by doing that, if we have, if there is some sort of health event that happens in between there, we really don't understand how people bounce back. What we have to do is really continuously measure people for a long period of time. Well, people don't like that, right? It's not very convenient. That's like you coming to the lab every single day. But if I can give you a watch and have you interact with it once in a while and collect all that data, all that little sensor data in the background continuously, and have it sent back to me, that's a tool I could potentially use to answer this question of resilience and bounce back. So we really want to understand the lived experience. Mobility, its risk factors. So when there's we call them intervening health events, you get knocked down. Some people get knocked down with the same type of health event, and they start on a new trajectory. Other people get knocked down and come right back. We want to know why. So as part of the philosophy, we had to create a platform that was customizable, meaning different researchers could program it without knowing how to program software. So fortunately, this is where collaboration comes in. I work with a collaborator named Sanjay Ranka in computer science. He has doctoral students who really love to program these things. And we were able to develop a platform that includes not just the app itself, but also the website, the server where the data goes, and also trying to get something back to the patient, the person's wearing the watches as well. So this is some movies here, little videos of 3 major components. This is kind of the server, and don't worry about this. This is kind of the computer science lingo. But what's important here is you have this interface. The interface allows us to actually program the watch without knowing code. So I'll type in a question, I'll type in like what are my responses that I want to, and when you're going to get that question. And then I press send, and it'll pop up on your watch and be scheduled. And we'll ask questions like pain, and this is me, right there, that's my arm. And I'm answering questions. And it's really easy, right? You're just rotating it, and I press send, and it's really quick. We call these micro interactions, right? And people are highly likely to respond to these because they take hardly any time at all. They're much more likely to respond to these than things on their phone, because it's like a little buzz, and you respond. Now, in the background, what's happening is all the sensor data is still being collected in the background. So now you have this merger of a person's symptoms with the sensor with location. Now, everyone gives consent to these studies. We're not taking anything from personal devices or anything like that. They've consented. They know we're collecting this information. And then also, the researcher wants to know, well, where's the data going? Well, we have to display it to them. So in real time, when a person gives their response, it shows up on our interface. So we can measure adherence if they're having some issues with the devices. We can even plan interventions. Like if we see a problem with that, if a person has a high pain level, we can intervene. And I'll show you what we're doing with that as well. So an example of this work is when we gave these devices watches with our Roam software on it, and people with chronic pain, chronic knee pain, actually. And with that, what they did was they wore these watches, they reported their pain, and then they were also GPS, geolocations were being measured. And we quantified a different measure of life space here. What we did was all the GPS measurements on the individual were collected, so we can measure like your kind of circle, how far you went away from your home, how long you spent away from your home, where you went, the distance. There's like 7 or 8 different features we can quantify from this. Well, what's important, though, is we ask a very simple question. If you have pain on a certain day, are you less likely to get around and go out? Well, that's intuitively, no duh. Like, we kind of know that, right? No, surprisingly, that's never been measured. That's really hard to measure, right? Because you need that continuous measurement. And that's the case, right? So people who had higher, within an individual, not just between people, within yourself, if you have a higher pain day, these participants, they were less likely to get out and move around. And I'm not talking about walking. This also includes driving. What we're working on right now is what we call an electronic cohort. And we have this grant from the National Institute of Health. It's called Wearable Technology Infrastructure with our Roam software on intervening health events. And electronic cohorts are things like when we bring people back every year and we do our assessments. Electronic cohort is that, well, we're going to have you come, orient you, and then we're going to send you on your way, and we're going to collect data remotely, completely. The whole goal here is to get people have these intervening health events. They're intermittent. We don't know when they're going to happen. They're kind of random, right? We don't know when. So we want to know, though, we can look at the watch data before that health event happens because they're going to report it on the watch, and then after, how people bounce back. And we can measure their mobility with the watch. So far we have 44 people enrolled. Our goal is 125. So I'm going to move on to using this tool, right? The smartwatch, again, we're using it as a new research tool in the context of a very serious condition called chronic limb-threatening ischemia. And this is an advanced form of peripheral arterial disease. Its prevalence is about 2 million people in the country. It's associated with very poor quality of life. If it's untreated, it is fatal. And the primary way to help it or try to cure it is revascularization. The problem is the procedure, the surgery is high risk. Partly because these folks have a lot of comorbidities along with it. And when you tend to do this surgery, people get infections, they have other complications from their other comorbid conditions. But again, if you don't have it done, it's fatal. And so there's a high readmission rate, there's a high mortality rate, and about a third have postoperative complications. But when I was talking to the surgeon here, Dr. Samir Shah, who's my colleague and co-investigator on this project, he's like, I was asking, well, what do you do with patients when you release them from the hospital? Do you call them at all? No. You see how they're doing? No. They don't have the capacity to do that, right? They wait for the patient to call them. And oftentimes it's too late. So we thought, well, maybe we can use this tool, give it to them after surgery, ask them to report back their symptoms. And then the doctor, physician assistants, nurse practitioners who are working in that unit could see that and intervene earlier. So, give you an example here. Bob here has the surgery. He got one of our smartwatches before the surgery. This is part of our trial right now. And then he's asked to use the watch to record his symptoms. Again, getting these little micro interactions. And then when the app sends the information, it sends it back to the electronic health record where doctors, nurses can actually see the information in front of them and react to it. So they can act more quickly and accordingly. Well, that all sounds wonderful. It's really hard because these electronic health records are meant to be internal. Getting data from the outside into this thing is really hard. It requires a lot of security clearances. A lot of IT folks have to be involved. And it's taken us a couple years to get a system that accepts our data from these devices, displays it in a way that, like, practitioners, providers can actually see, use, and we asked them lots of questions. We had focus groups to make sure that they got the information that they wanted. But another thing we have to do, which is extremely hard, is to get the providers to actually use the interface and use the data, because it's not part of the normal workflow. So there's a few components to this study, not only the technology component, it's also, well, the patient has to use it and be able to use it and kind of adhere to using it. And then when the data comes back to the electronic health record, I got to get the providers to actually look at it, right? Because it's not part of their normal workflow. So we have to work with behavioral psychologists and bring people in to kind of train them and monitor it. So we're doing a trial right now, a randomized trial, where all the patients get watches, but data is only seen to providers from half the watches. So it's kind of a blinded design. And the whole goal here is that does this extra information that's coming from the patient themselves, so we call it patient-generated data, from the patient themselves about their symptoms, does it change or manage their care differently? And one of our big measures in this is mobility from the watch itself. So I have a few take-home messages. You've made it this far. Congratulations. So the tools that we use for Gerotechnology, they're increasingly being recognized in clinical and research settings. And the development of these tools is really skyrocketing. The data derived from some of the tools and from these like data resources and repositories are just now starting to like think about, well, how can we use them with regard to climate change or with regard to climate events? Like I'm working with Yan Wang. And also, we don't really understand how these tools can be used in the context of clinical care. Like anything else, I'm a scientist, so we have to test it, right? It's kind of obvious, oh yeah, more information is better, but that's not always true. And we have to convince other people to look at that information. And that's what we're trying to do. So I will stop there. I don't know if there's time for questions or not, but if you're comfortable, you're doing it too wrong. You're doing it wrong.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
So, sorry guys. I'm sure we have some questions in the audience. Here we have back here. All right, I'll toss this to you.
Hi, I have a question. In any of your data, are you collecting the support these people are having at home? Are they alone? Do they have family? Do they have spouses? Are they getting encouraged to mobilize? I'm a physical therapist, so I'm very into that. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really important with all your data.
You're talking about the CTL?
Yeah, with the mobility data. With your...
So right now, we're observing only. We do have plans, right? It's surprisingly really difficult to get everything to work together, meaning get the patient to understand it, a participant to understand it, get them to report. And we still don't really know yet, like if people, like if they have a serious event, are they going to pick the watch back up and start using it? We're going to find out. Now, remember, we know these people beforehand. We talk to them about the study, and we say, hey, if you have an event, please put the watch back on. It may not happen. But like if we're thinking about interventions, that's when it would happen. So, time will tell. I love that thing, by the way. That's so cool.
So building off of that a little bit, if you were to have, let's say there's a hurricane occurring and you and your partner have a child, how is the data going to tell apart from, is it the child that's making you stay home, so your resiliency is going to be lower, or is there a mental change that's happening that's causing you to stay home and the child may be going out or maybe want to go out more, but it's not happening? How are you going to tell between that with the data?
You can from that. What that data is not at the individual level. So, and this is where collaboration is also important, right? So I think at the individual level. She thinks at the policy level. So this is like information for the people who run these neighborhoods. It's like if they're not bouncing back, that's something they can know, right? And the behavior, that's a whole other can of worms.
So I'm wondering, I imagine there's a lot of undocumented interfacing with smartwatches and the doctors. For example, my mother, it was her smartwatch that told her she was having AFib. And then she called the doctor and went in, and sure enough, she was having AFib. But how long would it have been if her smartwatch hadn't have told her? I don't know.
Yeah, right. I think that's happening all the time.
Yeah.
Right, as the technology develops. our watches do that, but again, we're looking at already a high-risk population. If it does come up, we do tell people to tell us, if it does come up.
Anybody else? Right here?
So, I don't know where to put it. About a year and a week ago, I had my first epileptic seizure. And I could see how your watch could make a huge difference if it could anticipate,
Oh, yeah.
let you know, warn you, keep you from having that. And I think there are some apps, and it all depends on what kind of seizures you're likely to have. But epilepsy is one of the most common neurological conditions in seniors. If you look at the curve, your chances of developing epilepsy go way up.
Actually, I didn't know that. I don't know much about it.
Well, it's something, as a researcher, you might want to look into, because I can see all the things you're talking about are going through my head. I can't drive anymore. I have to rely on my husband for
Yeah,
those different points.
Right.
And so, yeah, not a question,
no, I get it.
but just a
Food for thought.
Oh, Elena. Elena, should I toss this? I don't know.
So, when you said the whole part about the physicians not calling a person back to maybe catch them declining or something happening.
Not calling them back, they don't
call them.
proactively call.
Right.
They will call back if
So
the patient
if-
calls.
Do you think out of this study, it could be their outcome measures may be significantly impacted if they could find out what post-surgery events were occurring?
Yeah.
So with your watch, they start finding out their own outcome measures could significantly be impacted positively, I'm guessing, if they could catch something in advance and maybe change that type of protocol. Does this kind of thing happen accidentally out of studies like this?
Absolutely. So there's two components of this study. One is like actionable things, like that the nurses can actually alleviate. One is like severe pain. Another one is like infections, like we ask a battery of things about getting an infection, a fall, a health event, them seeing a doctor. How about their other leg, if they're having pain in their other leg? So we ask those, but then we ask all these other questions that are more of like on the academic side. We ask them, how much difficulty are you having with your activities of daily living, getting up from the toilet, showering, bathing? That stuff's not known so much because it really hasn't been probed or asked about. So part of this is setting it up so you can discover some things. But again, the balance is, like, I can't like send a million questions to the patients. They're going to get burdened too much. So absolutely. Yeah.
Other questions? Okay, well, please thank Dr. Manini for
Thank
being
you.
here.
Thank you for coming tonight.